Hi, I'm the Reverend Ann Dieterle, the rector of Calvary Episcopal Church in Columbia, Missouri, and this is the Week 4 summary for our Calvary OneRead using Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. In this week's readings, we cover chapters 9, 10, and 11, and number 9 is the places we go when we search for connection. Belonging, fitting in, connection, disconnection, insecurity, invisibility, and loneliness. And the difference between belonging and fitting in, she kicks off with that. And particular belonging is a deep spiritual practice of being able to show up with our most authentic selves and showing that to the world, which means we belong to ourselves, and we can also stand alone in the wilderness. She uses the phrase, be here, be you, belong. Belonging requires you to be who you are, whereas fitting in requires you to, well, it doesn't matter if you are who you are, it matters you to go along with whatever the group you are trying to fit in with wants you to be, or wants you to pretend to be, as the case may be. And how important that is in things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and also just for our own sense of well-being. So if we're not our most authentic selves, we will not find true belonging, no matter if we are, in the middle of a group of hundreds of people or a crowd of folks who we call friends. If we aren't able to be ourselves, we will feel a sense of disconnection and loneliness. A little bit later on about that, because loneliness is a high predictor of unhealth and the lack of wellness. But before we get there, I do want to just touch on, she talks about self-security, which is the open and non-judgmental acceptance of one's own weaknesses. Perhaps you can see where that would help with welcoming other people as well. If we can accept our own weaknesses with grace and non-judgment, then we probably can accept others' weaknesses with grace as well. Because a lot of times, I was just reading in another book that what we don't like in other people is oftentimes what we don't like in ourselves. And so again, coming to peace with that is a good step in our sense of security, but also in being able to welcome others as they are. And finally, I'll close out. Again, these chapters seem like they're getting more intense. But she talks about loneliness as the absence of meaningful social interaction. And I think that most of us have felt that way throughout the pandemic at one time or another. I was living by myself in Florida at the time, but was not too far from family, and so saw them at different points and with different frequencies, even in the most tightly controlled shelter-in-place orders. Controlled with not being the right, tightly encouraged shelter-in-place periods. But even still, there was that sense of there was just not a whole lot of meaningful connection, and we did it for real reasons. But that it really, I think, took a toll on us as a culture. I think we're seeing some of that now as we see people's behavior being a little unpredictable and erratic and maybe worse than normal. I've never remember a period in time where I heard so many people getting thrown off of flights or airplanes having to land early because of an unruly passenger. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But I think it's that stress and loneliness that we've been experiencing has really heightened that. And there's shame around feeling lonely, or there can be. Remember, shame, she talked about in an earlier chapter. Shame as opposed to guilt, which is that I did something bad. Shame is that I am bad. So if you feel lonely and then you tie that to, well, there's something wrong with me, you can see where that's a recipe for things to get worse and a sense of isolation to increase. But instead, if you can notice that in yourself and see it as a warning sign rather than as some kind of a character defect, that you're given some power to do something to counter that. And so I hope that, if nothing else, if you are watching this video and reading this book and that you felt lonely and felt like that's been something to be ashamed of before, that you can set that experience aside and take it for what it is, an opportunity to reach out for help or to reach out in a meaningful way for connection. um, rather than taking it as an excuse to isolate further. In chapter 10, she talks about places we go when the heart is open. I'm kind of surprised in this sense, although I don't know why, that there are some positives, more positive emotions and some less positive emotions here. Love, lovelessness, heartbreak, trust, self-trust, betrayal, defensiveness, flooding, and hurt. We had talked about, she doesn't cover here, nor would I expect her to, those 3 different Greek words for love that will appear in scripture. Well, mostly philos, which is friendship, and agape, which is more of a verb than a feeling. But then eros is, of course, romantic love. The first 2, eros and philos, tend to be, you need reciprocation for that. For the third, again, which is almost more of a verb than it is a feeling, reciprocation is not necessary. But love we cultivate when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. And she goes on to talk a little bit about how other emotions and behaviors can build up love or tear down love. And so it's important. I think she's getting to how she's going to tie all these things together as well. She also covers heartbreak, but one that I want to spend a little bit more time on is trust, and the acronym BRAVING, which she says are the 7 elements for trust: boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. She talked about boundaries in an earlier chapter. Reliability, meaning that you are aware of your competencies and limitations, so you don't overpromise and underdeliver. We were giggling about vault, meaning it should be changed to Vegas for the V in one of our groups, in that whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So you honor confidences is basically what that means. I want to say a little bit more about non-judgment, that we can talk about how we feel without fear of judgment there. And then this goes for self-trust as well. All of these can be turned inward as how we build our own sense of trust in ourselves. And then that generosity is not necessarily, it's not related to charitable giving, but instead is, do we extend the most generous interpretation possible to the intentions, words, and actions of others? So, did that person ignore your email because they're lazy or, whatever, or did they just get busy, or did the computer or the cloud somewhere eat that correspondence? Again, it's not always right or correct is the better word there, but extending the most generous interpretation allows you can imagine, or I can imagine, allows us to approach one another with our own feelings, and say, hey, this happened. Can I check what this meant for you, or where you're at, without inspiring the other person to be defensive with us. So those are the elements of trust. She talks about betrayal, and speaking of defensiveness, defensiveness is a way to protect our ego or our fragile self-esteem. Defensiveness is a behavior that is one of the predictors of divorce in a marriage. So important to note that when we feel ourselves, you may experience that in a particular part of your body. I know I definitely do. Like, I kind of get uptight, or I might get small. But noting that and being willing and able to observe it and maybe deflate it is an important thing to help maintain our relationships and also our own sense of well-being. If we're walking around feeling defensive about everything, our nervous system is on overdrive and we're hypervigilant, and that is not good for well-being either, let alone the relationships. Finally, number 11, places we go when life is good. These are all positive emotions, unlike some of the other places that we've been in this book. Joy, happiness, calm, contentment, gratitude, foreboding joy, that's not so positive, and then relief and tranquility. So I said foreboding joy, not so positive. I want to say a little bit more about that is something that a lot of us do when something good happens and we think, oh, it's that vulnerable feeling like, oh, this is so wonderful. I'm afraid that it's going to cease and that I'm going to feel pain because of it. And so, ironically, that sense of vulnerability, which could help us to feel more joy, may also make us feel overprotective of the experience or afraid to lose it. And so we diminish that sense of joy in ourselves. There's a prayer in our prayer book where the phrase is shield the joyous. And I think about foreboding joy when I think about that phrase now. We could say a lot about joy and happiness. Happiness, she notes, is from the Greek word makarios, or the Greek word for happiness is makarios. Mary uses that word, and the word that is blessed, from this day on, all generations will call me blessed. It's actually makarios there. But that joy is, we've had some discussions in our groups about whether we like these definitions, particularly for joy. But joy is based on internal circumstances, whereas happiness tends to be derived from things that are external, and that there does seem to be a state that goes with those emotions, that a lot of us seem to maybe be more joy positive or happiness positive, where others are more neutral, and that tends to be, fixed is too strong a word, but that we all tend to have our kind of a speed at which we idle in those departments. And then real quickly, contentment and gratitude. She quotes the Dalai Lama here. When you are discontent, you always want more, more, more. Your desire can never be satisfied. But when you practice contentment, you can say to yourself, oh yes, I already have everything that I need. And the monastics, and of course the Dalai Lama was one, talk a lot about contentment. I will also quote one of my favorite theologians, Bono, the lead singer for U2, in one of their songs, you can never get enough of what you don't really need. So contentment is not meant to diminish folks the experience of not having what you need, but it is to counter, along with gratitude, of enjoying and being grateful for the blessings that you do have, without getting trapped into a consumer mindset of, I just need more. Not feeling gratitude when our needs are satisfied means that we normalize kind of what we have and then need more to get back up to that same level of feeling good. So gratitude, I don't know if you don't, I would encourage, or at least offer to you, a gratitude practice where you begin each day and end each day with just listing 3 things that you're grateful for. And to this point of what she talks about in the book, I had always thought about I needed to come up with 3 different things every day and every time that I was grateful for. But that newness, that novelty is sometimes what we crave when we're discontent. But actually being grateful for some of those same things, even if they're super basic, is a good practice for contentment. So for me, it's often my fur babies, the cat and the dog, and maybe, a safe place to live, things that other people now, I take it for granted. And when we see things happening overseas in the Ukraine, it's really clear that that is something I don't want to take for granted, as others are struggling with it. So I will leave that there, and we close up next week, starting with chapter 12, and I am encouraging you to read the conclusion to the book as well, beyond the chapters. But this has been a fun experience so far. I hope you're enjoying it. God bless you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.